Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's Partner Web Conference, Enabling Microsoft 365 Business Voice with Direct Routing, Leveraging AudioCodes SBC. My name is Laura, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. By participating in this session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to be part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered by email within 7 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. We do have presenters standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. However, due to the high attendance numbers today, there may be a delay in answering your questions, so we ask for your patience while the presenter team works through those. Now, a little bit more about this presentation. This web conference has been brought to you by the Microsoft 365 Partner Marketing Team. This presentation will be approximately 50 to 55 minutes in length, and our presenters will then switch over to Q&A and start addressing any unanswered questions. We'd like to thank you in advance for your patience while they work through those. If you find that your question was not answered or you would like more follow-up, you can also head over to the Microsoft 365 Yammer group and post your question there. We'll share that Yammer link in the Q&A panel momentarily. Thank you again for your patience during these announcements. Now, on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Zahid Saeed, Architect, and from AudioCodes, we have Scott Middlebrooks, Sales Solution Architect, and Avi Perpignol, Senior Sales Engineer. Zahid, over to you.
Thanks, Laura, and welcome to the session, everyone. At the end of this session, you will be able to understand the difference between Microsoft calling plans, their availability, and how to leverage direct routing where calling plans are not available. We will walk you through step-by-step instruction, how to configure and manage direct routing with Session Border Controller. AudioCodes team will also provide overview of their managed services platform that will help to build business-wise managed services. So some of you maybe have attended the June 24 session, maybe the objectives are the same, but the contents will be different here. So let's talk about Microsoft 365 Business Voice Calling. So Teams platform, most of you are familiar about that. So Microsoft Teams provides secure collaboration platform. With that collaboration platform, we also feel like that phone calls continue to be an important part of doing business, from office to remote sites to call center, wherever you are. The challenge is many enterprises have multiple phone systems and platforms to deliver these experiences. So this gets a little bit complicated and also adds in the price. So Microsoft Teams help you simplify your enterprise voice services with a reliable, high-quality calling solution built on Microsoft Cloud. With Teams, you have everything you need to make and receive phone calls from anywhere, including your desk phone or mobile phone or computer or from any device. And because it's a part of Microsoft 365, you get a modern voice solution that combines unified communications with the teamwork capabilities into all-in-one communication and secured collaboration solution. And that normally IT is already used to, and they're working with that. And best of all, your business saves time, money with a single provider. So these are some of the features from the PBX, which you will see, like you can get if you look like call par, call forwarding, call hold. So all of these features are there in the Microsoft Teams, which you will get on the right-hand side. If you look at how you can manage it as an administrator, how you can perform multiple tasks like number porting, multilingual IVR, and call queues, and all of those capabilities are there. The slide is there for your reference. And this one here, specifically, we are talking today, like if you look here, we have Microsoft Teams, and then we have the phone system, right? The PBX here built in that. So there are two options how you can leverage PSTN calling in Microsoft. One is either go through the Microsoft calling plans here, and the second one is the direct routing. And our today's session will be more talk about the direct routing, how you can leverage Session Border Controller to make the PSTN call. So let's talk first a little bit, give you an overview on the Microsoft calling plan. So we have M365 Business Voice that is like $20, and that goes up to 300 seats. So I will explain the difference in the next couple of slides, like what is the difference between enterprise and the SMB SKU. But here we have the catch is 300 seats. And the calling plans are available in United States, UK, and Canada today. And like here, Microsoft acts as your carrier, and you all the PSTN calls and everything is gone through Microsoft, and you can also do the number porting as part of this. And once you get this package here, like $20, then you also, it includes like 3,000 domestic minutes. You can also add on international calling plan. If you need toll-free numbers, you can also get it additional minutes. That is through communication credits. So because this session is more, we are talking about the direct routing, but I will include more information on the communication credit in the appendix if you need more information on that. So the second option is here about the direct routing. Let's say if we don't offer like the calling plans before, it was US, UK, and Canada. What about the other markets on the business queue, which I was talking about? So then you need direct routing. So you can still, you can get the PBX, like which I mentioned before, and then you have all the features, but then you need to connect through the session border controller and connect through a telco to do your PSTN calling, and then you can also do audio conferencing and everything. And this is also widely available. So whenever we present the business queue, normally the question comes, oh, is the team supports only 300 users? The business queue, which I mentioned, it is 300 users. But if we are talking about the other plans, like E-plans, which we have, enterprise, or others like enterprise plans, there are, you can have as many users as you want in that. And the difference between two is like we have the like SMB specific set of wizard. You have some specific calling rules for the SMB there. And the availability for the calling plans here in the business wise is only these 3 countries at this moment. But if you're talking about the enterprise, you have much broader there available in the enterprise queue. And the direct routing, as I said, you can go much bigger, and it's 70 plus countries, and you can do also everywhere audio conferencing is available. So that's kind of a comparison between SMB SKU and the enterprise plan, what we have in the Microsoft. So let's talk a little bit, what is the direct routing, and AudioCodes team will explain much more in detail about their products and how they can help you to achieve it. But if you look here, you have Teams, Microsoft phone system that is part of the Teams, and then you connect it with the session border controller. And session border controller is here, and then it is connecting to, you know, the PSTN trunk. What does it mean is that you need to have a telco of your choice wherever you are. If you are in the United States, Verizon or AT&T, or Canada is Rogers and Telus more, and if you are in Europe, it will be different. So you can select your telco, but again, telco has to connect to the session border controller, and then Teams has to connect to the SBC as well. The additional benefits, if you look at on the SBC side, is also you have much more benefits as part, like if you have a existing third-party PBX there, that you can also leverage when you can connect it to the SBC. And sometimes you have other needs like FX and FX or FXS port. SBC also helps you as part of this to connect with them. So these are some more additional benefits, like it provides you SBC additional security for denial of service tax, and also like toll fraud, it helps you. So it's not only SBC important to make the PSTN call, but it has much more additional benefits. Plus, when you connect to the, you know, when you connect it, when you want to provide your managed services, so it can also help you to scale through the session border controller. So what vendors are there for the SBC today? So we have a strict certification process. We have a validated, all the third-party vendors, we make sure we work with them through a third-party lab. All the testing is done, and every time, that's why I included this link here. So you can also go to this link and see how many vendors are certified, because it might change based on how much testing we are doing. And SPCs can be physical appliances, or they can be deployed in the cloud, in the Azure or AWS. So these are different options you will get. And again, as I said, Scott and Evie will explain more about that. So with that, I will let Scott to talk about direct routing with AudioCodes. Scott, it's to you now.
Great, thanks, Avi. Let me get my full screen there. Yeah, so direct routing with AudioCodes. Before we get too involved there, let me just give you a brief background of AudioCodes. We've been in business for 26 years. We go back all the way to basically the beginning with Microsoft Unified Communication Systems, dating back to LCS, OCS, Link, and Skype for Business, and of course now Teams. We power the unified communications, and especially Microsoft communications, for 50 of the top Fortune 100 companies. So we've got a great heritage and a great history that you can lean into and trust for your unified communications needs. So as Zahid was referencing about direct routing, I kind of wanted to summarize that real quickly and go through some common scenarios that we hear. These may resonate with you as far as what your customers are asking for, and be able to identify common scenarios. As Zahid was mentioning, direct routing is a great fit for those locations where you don't have calling plans today, and you still want to be able to give Microsoft Teams phone system to your customers. So if you're outside of the US, Canada, or the UK with business voice, direct routing is your answer. Again, direct routing, the second point there, is highly flexible. If you can't do it with calling plans, you can do it with direct routing. A lot of the times we'll hear that customers want to maintain existing relationships with telephony providers, whether that's for an existing PSTN phone system or trunks, or they're happy with their current provider. They've got a relationship and they don't want to lose that relationship. Direct routing allows you to plug into those existing relationships and leverage them, bring them forward into Microsoft Teams. If you've got a customer who's resistant to porting phone numbers, that's overwhelming. They can't process that change. That's, you can say, that's perfectly fine, Mr. Customer. We've got a solution for you. We'll plug this in, and that's all you have to do is plug this in. You're up and running. And as Zahid mentioned there toward the end of his section of the presentation, we can tie in with existing phone systems, whether that's analog devices. Here's some common scenarios here. Think about overhead paging, fax modem systems, any kind of automation. One thing that I hear a lot, it's almost a second thought, but once I probe a little bit, customers kind of have that aha moment. Postage machines. These are just very common scenarios. It's like, oh yeah, we do have those. We need some analog lines. So that's and process automation. Manufacturing relies on this a lot for their phone home mechanisms. Security system access. You have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that. Perhaps that's something that you want in band with your existing voice over IP infrastructure, or something that you may need to go out of band. But this allows you that flexibility to provide those solutions. And for some customers, we find that their existing phone system does something really special or really unique to their business, and they need to keep that for a certain segment of those users. But they want to be able to tie into Teams for where the rest of their business is going. So this direct routing allows you to do that, and allows you to create that bridge between kind of the old world and the new world. So that allows you to not necessarily have to do an all-in, all or nothing type of methodology. Direct routing brings that flexibility and brings that bridge. So let's talk a little bit about how you can deploy direct routing. And what we're thinking here is it's kind of a buy versus build process. And for those of you who are comfortable with this, we'd love to hear from you a little bit in the Q&A. If you want to kind of just talk to us a little bit about how you are doing direct routing today. If you're doing direct routing, are you offering managed services? Is it just kind of a hey, Mr. Customer, we'll get the SBC out to you, and that's kind of the end of the relationship. But what we're thinking here is, as a managed service, it allows you to create stickiness with your customer. It allows you to continue to add value. It's not just here's your SBC, let us know when you have more, when we can do more business together. As you can see here, what we're trying to articulate is that there's kind of 3 pillars to developing a direct routing as a managed service. One is the SBC. Of course, you have to have that. But then there's the kind of the professional services around getting that SBC up and running. And then there's the lifecycle management. What happens on day 2? So after you've pushed out the SBC, after you've configured it, the customer still enters a run state, and you still have to continue to do moves, adds, changes, service health reporting, troubleshooting, analytics. How are you doing that today? Are you doing that today? So that's, if you're building all of that yourself, that's great. That's fantastic. Avi's going to talk to you a little bit about how our SBCs and how you can configure that, how that can be a solution for you. Something I'd like to present here in the next section is a white label service called AudioCodes Live Cloud for Teams that allows you to have all 3 bullet points, 1, 2, 3, all in one packaged service. So buy it off the shelf, deliver it to your customer tomorrow, including the SBC, all the configuration, and all the lifecycle management. So that's our fancy slide there with the AudioCodes Live Cloud for Teams. Let me talk to you a little bit about what that looks like. When you're thinking about offering direct routing as a managed service, some of the things that you need to think about and that may not be as immediately apparent when you're thinking about offering this to your customers is these 4 steps. And it's from kind of beginning through to operations. How are you going to set up the SBC? How are you going to acquire it? Is it going to be the customer acquires the SBC, or are you going to offer it in a multi-tenant hosted model? When you're onboarding customers, onboarding can be a tedious process because you have to onboard them to the SBC, to the Teams tenant, and it's a very repeatable process. But do you have that automation in place for that repeatability? Anytime you don't have automation involved or any kind of structure, you enter into a place where human error can get involved. So that repeatable processes are very important to step 2 and 3, customer onboarding and lifecycle management. That's where you gain those efficiencies. And those efficiencies are what ultimately lead to higher margin. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Service tools and reporting. These are critical to being able to create that stickiness with your customer, being able to give them feedback around how well their service health is doing. How many calls have you processed this month? How many were good? How many were poor? What are the trends and analysis that we're seeing? Perhaps you have one branch office that maybe isn't having their calls for a certain period of time aren't performing optimally, and this would allow you to poke into that and maybe investigate as to why. That's very important for that operations side of the house. So as I mentioned in the AudioCodes Live Cloud solution that we're talking about here, this is something that allows you to build a new service offering within your practice lines, and it allows you to offer that immediately. There's no huge investment in maybe doing a multi-tenant a CapEx multi-tenant SBC approach. You don't have to develop a whole lot of processes. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you in this Live Cloud for Teams solution, so that you can get to doing what you do best, which is manage your customer relationships and keep your customers happy. Now, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this is the show me the money section right here. This is the generate more margin. And what I like to say is efficiency leads to margin. And that's where what we're doing here is creating these processes that allow you to be highly efficient. You can do more with less. So allow your tier 3, tier 4, your architect, senior engineer level folks, allow them to get out of the mud, so to speak. Allow them to get out of the everyday, mundane, repeatable tasks and allow your junior resources to do that. That creates that efficiency and allows you to generate more money. Shorten time to market. As I mentioned before, this is something that is available to you today. You could buy it today and begin offering direct routing as a service to your customers tomorrow. So the proof is in the pudding. Let me show you just how easily, for one example, how easy it is to onboard a new customer to this live Cloud for Teams solution. And you can see here that's 4 steps to onboarding a customer. Step 1, and you can see here, this is our dashboard. There's a lot more to it than I have time to go into here. If you'd like to have a demo of this, please contact us. We'll have that information at the end. I'd love to walk you through a demo of this. But this, in here, we're going to demonstrate adding a customer. You click on the customer actions, click add a customer, enter your unique customer ID. Now, this customer ID is arbitrary. It's something that's unique within your business. It could be something that comes from a CRM, something that maybe just a unique customer name. It's something that you make up and is unique within your business. Now, here's the only kind of sticky wicket in this whole process is you need to have an admin credential from the customer. Now, it can be a delegated credential. It could be a delegated Teams admin credential. It doesn't need to be a global admin. But once you put that in there, you click on test connection, get the verification, click on next, and then this voice routing section. The only thing that's you see here that it's a drop-down list that you select the online PSTN gateway that's already populated from the provisioning that we've done for you. And then you update the prefix number ranges. So here in the US, that would be like an area code and a central office ID. Same concept around the world. You can upload a CSV if you have that. If not, you can just click on the +++ to update the list of prefix numbers. Click on submit, and you could get to sit back and enjoy your success. Your new customer is now ready for business. And with that, I am going to turn my presentation over to my partner in crime here, Avi.
Thank you. Let me begin sharing. Okay, so in this part of the presentation, I will be covering what it looks like to actually deploy direct routing. We're going to go a little bit deeper into the weeds, the knobs and switches. So the first part is, of course, the prerequisites. We want to look at what it is we need to do to get started. Of course, you'll need a certified session border controller. AudioCodes, of course, offers one. You'd need a connection to a telco, your PSTN provider that can be the traditional tier 1 AT&T or an over-the-top provider. Of course, you'll need an internet access. This will allow your SBC to make the connection to Teams. You will also want a fully qualified domain name, an FQDN, which allows Teams to find your SBC. It'll need to be resolvable via DNS. Now, you also need Teams to trust the edge of your SBC, and so you'll need to have a certificate assigned to that interface. Likewise, you will need to trust Teams, so we'll be adding to certificates there. Now, of course, you'll also want access to the Teams admin portal with administrator credentials to be able to add the SBC and make some configuration changes there to the users. And lastly, you will need your Microsoft user licenses. An example, of course, is the Microsoft 365 Business Voice license or the traditional E or A Suite licenses. Before we get into the actual deployment of an SBC, I do want to talk a little bit about 2 different deployment models. The one, the more traditional way of doing it is to dedicate an SBC to a customer. So really one SBC, one customer. The customer can host the SBC and maybe a provider can manage it on their behalf, or the provider may host the SBC on their behalf. Having a dedicated SBC maybe allows you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more complex integrations. But of course, it comes with a little bit more overhead. The customer then needs to do the groundwork when it comes to adding certificates and adding DNS entries and providing SIP trunks. The second deployment model, which is definitely more interesting in the small to medium space, is a multi-tenant SBC. What we mean by this is that you've got literally one SBC that serves multiple customers. Of course, a provider would host the SBC. It really does lend itself to offering a standardized offering, something that can be very repeatable. Microsoft has done a really fantastic job of optimizing this architecture. It has a single trunk to Teams. You don't need to create multiple connections to the Teams tenants. You can do so with one, what is referred to as a super trunk. And of course, as a provider, you then have the luxury of say, offering your customers telco service on their behalf. So you can pick a few, perhaps a few that would cover the geographical region that you want to serve, and stick with those fewer telco connections. And I think the best thing about it, of course, is that it's fast and easy. Microsoft, again, have made a pretty repeatable process in terms of onboarding new customers. So at a very high level, there are three main steps to deploying direct routing. The first, of course, is to deploy an SBC. And there's some considerations here. What do you deploy? Is it virtual? Is it physical? Is it native cloud? Where do you deploy it? At that point, you also want to configure the SBC. And there's a lot of considerations there. How do you configure it? We'll get into that in the demo. And lastly, there is the aspect of configuring the tenant. Before I go on into the actual demos, I'll mention that there are some differences in how direct routing is deployed, depending on whether you go with a dedicated SBC versus a multi-tenant SBC. So I will try and point out the differences at a high level, and these are things to keep in mind. So let's go through the configuration, and then we'll go through to the demo section. When it comes to deploying an SBC, you want to define your architecture ahead of time. Where will it be run? It's very popular these days to run the SBC in Azure. It is, of course, no physical footprint. It's easy to do, and it's very, very highly available. Then within Azure, you have the option of doing a standard virtual machine deployment or deploying a truly highly available, elastically scalable SBC. AudioCodes offers just such an SBC, and I believe we're the only vendor in the market to do so. You may also have considerations about which regions you might want to deploy in, availability zones, etc. If you want to do maybe regional geo-redundancy. You would, once you've decided what it is you want to deploy, you can find it in the Azure Marketplace. You'll run the Marketplace wizard, and you'll create the machine. And we'll go through that in a demo. Next up is the configuration of the SBC. Perhaps the easiest way to get started is to run the AudioCodes configuration wizard. This has been designed to facilitate or speed up the deployment. It doesn't work in all cases, but it definitely will allow you to get a bare bones configuration up and running, and then you can add just the small pieces like a certificate, and then customize it any which way you like. Once that is configured, you can check your connection. Is there a connection between the SBC and the Teams tenant? Lastly, we'll be looking at how to configure the tenant itself. At that point, you need to add an SBC to the tenant, and then make sure that the users are able to access the PSTN via that SBC. Okay, so now let's drop into the demo. What I've pulled up here is an Azure portal. First thing you'll want to do is create a resource. If you're looking for an SBC, a good place to start is searching for AudioCodes. As I mentioned earlier, AudioCodes does offer a couple of variants. One is the standard median virtual edition, which is fantastic and pretty, it'll probably cover most enterprises, even the large ones. But if you're looking at a multi-tenant SBC, one that is going to serve many tens of thousands of customers, or even many smaller customers, and there'll be a lot of change in the number of concurrent sessions that it handles, a median cloud edition SBC is probably the preferred option. It allows you to scale up and down. You will turn on resources as the demand increases and turn them down towards the end of the day as demand decreases. And it also provides true HA. You can literally fail over and not drop a single call, something that I believe we are the only vendors out there. So we'll hit create. And you'll have to define a few things here. I'll define a new resource group to deploy this SBC and its components into. On a DR SBC resource group. You'll choose region, of course, depending on where you are. Give it a username, and we'll paste in some credentials. Next, while this populates, I'll mention a few things on virtual machine size. There are a number of options when deploying the AudioCodes virtual machines. We do have a recommended standard, but you can go as little as you can see here, a standard B1MS. This happens to be for an orchestrator function, but you can deploy a very, very small footprint SBC on one of the smallest machines possible. And you can also do so at very high scales on the larger machines. I will leave all of these settings here standard. It'll pick all the public IP addresses and subnets. Next up here, we'll give it a few credentials to access the orchestrator. And at that point, you're just about ready to create your virtual machine. It really is that easy. I won't go and create that now, but I do have one that is already created. So once you have created your SBC, this is what it looks like when you first log in. You'll get the public IP address of your SBC. An SBC has a trusted side and an untrusted side. In this case, the side that we're exposing to the internet is the WAN, and that's the side that will connect to the team side. And on the LAN or trusted side, we can connect to a SIP trunk provider. Now, if you're in Azure, it happens to be both untrusted, but it's still a good idea from a security best practice to separate your SIP trunk and your team's environment so that you don't have any leakage of information from one environment to the other. Let's have a look at the configuration wizard. So AudioCodes has developed a configuration wizard. It's been built from years and years of deployments out in the field, and we've collected templates of deployments throughout the world, different carriers, different PBX vendors. So it really is an easy way to integrate with almost every provider you can think of and every PBX you can think of. If you want to have perhaps teams integrate with an on-premise or existing PBX for whatever reason, we have the templates to do so. In this section here, we define the architecture. What we are doing today is really a SIP trunk PBX, meaning we're going to connect an IP PBX to an ITSP, a SIP trunk provider. So you select your IP PBX, of course, in this case, it is Teams, and you can select your SIP trunk. And there are very many of them, but in our example today, maybe we'll choose Twilio, which is an online over-the-top SIP trunk provider. As I said, we will choose a network setup of LAN and WAN, which separates both sides of the SBC. Next up, we look at system-related parameters. If you want to say lock down, and by default, it is recommended to lock down the management interface to HTTPS. You would add some NTP time zone details here as well. This is where you configure the interfaces. You would have your LAN side and your WAN side. This, of course, will be auto-populated on the WAN side when you're deploying in Azure, because a public IP is assigned to you, and it's then NATed to internal IPs. On the LAN side, you have private IPs, and of course, if you want, you can add a public IP and NAT to those as well. Moving on, this is where you define the IP PBX, Teams in our case. As you can see, we have pre-populated the FQDN or the URL to reach Teams out in the cloud. This resolves to a number of different records, which all resolve themselves to to IP addresses based on your geographical location. You also want to define your domain. This is the FQDN of the SBC itself. When Teams reaches out to the SBC, it'll be looking for this FQDN, or rather it'll use this FQDN to resolve an IP address that correlates to your SBC. Everything else here is pre-populated for you, TLS, your details, etc. So we'll move on to the next section. SIP trunk, in this case, it's pre-populated the Twilio FQDN and chosen the default settings, but you can of course make changes as needed. There is a section here for number manipulation. As it happens with Teams, number manipulation is less preferred. We want to stick with E164 numbering format throughout. You're almost near the end of deploying your SBC. This is a summary of the configuration as you've defined it in the wizard. You would go next and hit apply and reset. I'm not going to do that because that's going to override my existing configuration. That's almost it. That was pretty easy, but there is just one other thing that we would like to do. It's being a little slow on me, so I'll speak to it. We would like to add certificates to these interfaces. As I said earlier, Teams needs to trust your SBC, so you need to generate a certificate signing request and install that certificate and all the intermediary and root certificates, and then associate that TLS certificate context with the SIP interface. And in all likelihood, you'll want to do that for the SIP trunk provider as well. We won't go too much into the details, but this is done in the IP network security section of the configuration. If everything has been done right, you can then begin to see in the monitoring section of the GUI that a connection is up to Teams. You will the SBC will be sending out what are referred to as SIP options, basically a SIP level ping message, and if Teams replies, you know that your connection is up and running correctly. And once you configure this SBC in Teams, Teams itself will connect or send SIP option messages to the SBC. So that really is easy. When you are doing a multi-tenant SBC, you could of course use the configuration wizard to get yourself started and then begin to add customers. You would add what's referred to as an IP group for every new customer. That would be a manual configuration. If you wanted to, though, it's very amenable to automation. So you could script it, or you could use the product that we mentioned earlier, which really automates this entire process. It automates the configuration of the SBC, the peering with the customer's tenant, and the management of this system from day to day. So let's drop out of this demo. The last bit I'm going to do is go and look at the Teams part of the configuration. At this part, we are looking at defining the SBC that we have just deployed and created. So this is the Teams admin center. You would go over to the voice section here and look down at direct routing. Now this is a lab environment we use. You can see a number of SBCs that we play around with. But if we wanted to add a new SBC, we'd hit add and define the FQDN, that URL that allows Team to find the SBC. It would be something like sbc.contoso.com. Now you've defined an SBC, and we can move on to configuring how to access that. If, however, we're doing a multi-tenant SBC, it would look a little bit more like this. It would be Contoso sbc.partner.com. Now what we've done here is we've created an SBC. It happens to be the same SBC that any customer would use, but we've given it a unique URL that a customer's tenant will use to reach the PSTN. And then you might have a datum.sbc.partner.com. You will begin to list a number of SBCs. They're all the same SBC, but a number of SBCs in the carrier tenant. Now, how does the customer tenant reach a SBC that is in fact in the carrier's tenant? Well, the way this is done is that the SBC is appears in the customer's tenant once the carrier and the customer have peered. We add the customer's domain to the carrier's, pardon me, the other way around. You add the carrier's domain to the customer's tenant, and once that happens, it sees the SBC as an additional resource. Once you have defined your SBC, you then need to allow it to be reached, or define the rules for being able to access it. This is done with a number of constructs in Teams. One is PSTN usages, and one is known as a voice route. A voice route will basically says, given this dialed number, I would like you to use this voice route, which refers to the PSTN usages. And eventually, once it comes to the user, wait while it loads. Once it comes to the user, you will see that you will have assigned a phone number ahead of time. You do need to do that. And then you define a policy for this user. The policy here, if you have a look here, is a voice routing policy, happens to be unrestricted. The voice routing policy unrestricted would map to PSTN usage, which would then map to the SBC itself. And any call placed by this user having this particular policy will be routed out the SBC we had created. So that's it. It is fairly straightforward to configure this SBC, to find it in the marketplace, deploy it. I will also mention that our SBCs in the marketplace can be downloaded right now. They include some demo licenses and includes a Teams license. So you can actually spin this up right now and get started playing around. Of course, if you do run into any difficulties, we would be happy to assist you. Please reach out to us. Let me pull up the contacts page. We're always happy to help. We have a great deal of experience and happy to help you get started. And if you want deeper demos or instructions on how to do this, we would, of course, be happy to help. At this point, I'm going to hand over back to Zahid.
Thanks, Avi, and thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. So while we have some time, let me see if we have any question which is not answered. I see only one question there. Are we going to get the full recording? Yes, no worries. You will get the recording and you will get also the deck as part of this. While we have the time, let me ask you, Avi and Scott, like right now we are focused on SMB, especially this session, and you might have different SBC models for this, and which model or product you feel is good for SMB, so they should consider that for their SMB customers.
Yeah, so we have a number of options. It really depends on what model you're choosing, deployment model you're choosing to offer. If you plan to do a dedicated SBC per customer, the standard AudioCodes Median Virtual Edition running in AudioCodes would be a good fit, and it can be run on really a very small footprint and cost very little for the customer per month. If, however, you plan to scale this service and onboard users on a very regular basis, perhaps a multi-tenant SBC is a better option for you. Now, that needs to scale, of course, and it needs to be affordable. The Median Cloud Edition of SBC that can be deployed in Azure is a fantastic option for this. First of all, it's full HA. You can do hitless upgrades. You can failover without any drop in media for all of your tenants, which is obviously pretty important and something that the competition cannot do. It also has the benefit of being able to scale dynamically. If you're operating out of, say, one part of the world, one geographical region, most of your users are going to be working during the same time of the day, and the concurrencies are going to peak around the same time of day. And you're using compute at approximately the same time every day. But outside of those hours, you're using very little compute, and you don't necessarily want to pay for that compute when it's sitting idle. So a Cloud Edition SBC is a good option because it can dynamically scale up to meet the demand and dynamically scale down when the demand is has died down.
Yeah,
I think that.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so it fits very well with kind of the building your own approach, and these are the considerations that you have to think about as far as the capacity planning, the compute planning, resource planning, and that's where the kind of the AudioCodes Live Cloud solution. Like I said in my section, we've done the heavy lifting for you. So on a simple per user per month pricing scale, we include whatever SBC is needed for the solution. As Avi mentioned, in most cases for SMB market, it's going to, the multi-tenant approach is going to be the most applicable. But as Zahid was asking about, scaling up an enterprise scale, we find that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and we may need SBCs on-prem, we may need SBCs in the cloud, we may need a mix of the two, and that's the simplicity of Live Cloud for Teams. For you to be able to offer that to your customers is no matter where the SBC is, no matter what deployment topology needs to take place, it's all included in that per user per month pricing. So we have plenty of flexible options just depending on how you want to offer this service to your customer.
Excellent. And I do have some questions here. I think we have time so we can answer. So it's again for the AudioCodes team. Can you view how to make test call from AudioCodes?
I'm not sure what they mean by view test calls, but there's really a number of options. The SBC itself has a feature called test call and allows you to initiate call with real media towards a destination and also receive test calls, answer it, and play media. But I think one useful feature of the AudioCodes Live Cloud is that we include a quality monitoring and reporting function. So any call you place will have been measured from a quality perspective, and all of its parameters recorded, the setup of the call and the teardown of the call, and can be found retroactively. In the Teams Live Cloud portal, you can log in, find the call that was placed. You could even see a SIP ladder diagram of the call, if perhaps the call ended prematurely and there was some cause code that you need to find. Likewise, you can look into the very quality measurements of the call down to 5-second increments. And this, of course, is very useful if you're doing a dedicated SBC for a customer and you're sending media off to your SIP trunk provider and there's quality issues. The AudioCodes quality monitoring tools will allow you to quickly understand that perhaps the SIP trunk provider is reordering packets before it gets to you, or perhaps there are packet drops when you're sending your packets off to the SIP trunk provider. So you have a lot of visibility there.
You're referring to the reporting and analytics tools that are available in Live Cloud for Teams, Avi?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I should mention that they're available as a standalone product as well.
So you read my mind. Exactly where I was going. And then, of course, Zahid, I'm sure the call quality dashboard is something that you might want to mention here, as far as that's also available as a native to Teams, made just as far as offering a multitude of options to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have, as Scott mentioned, within the Teams admin interface, you can do CQD, like call quality dashboard. You can see that, and it also tells you the SPC which plays the call, and it has analytics on that you can look at even at the call quality there. So we have one more question here for AudioCodes team. Can one tenant have more than one SPC connected with different FQDNs?
Absolutely. In fact, in the larger organizations, it's probably preferred. If you're a global organization, you'd probably want to stick an SBC, maybe one in the Americas and one in Europe. Then you have to decide, well, how am I going to route the calls to the right SBC? The ways to do that are to define policies in the Teams tenant. And so you would have perhaps a calling policy which says this user can call globally, and if it happens to be a US number routed to the US SBC. If that happens to be a French number, route it to the French SBC. There can even be different FQDNs as well. If you are an organization with multiple tenants, you can utilize one SBC between them. So yes,
Okay.
there are a number of options there.
No, that's good. And other question we have is also, I don't know if you want to answer it or maybe the documentation, the firewall ports that needs to be opened for this deployment, right? So we can also share on the team side the documentation, but anything if you Avi wants to talk about firewall ports, or we can also send along the documentation as part of the recording of this webinar. Yeah.
Absolutely. Our standard deployment guide takes you through every single step in a lot of detail, and includes a section there on what the firewall ports should be. Interesting thing about Microsoft Teams is that when it comes to media, you really need to open up very few ports. It used to be the case in the old days of Skype Online and on-prem that you needed to open up a very large range of ports to accommodate the media flows. But through multiplexing mechanisms, Microsoft has achieved a very small firewall pinhole footprint.
Okay, and then I will take the one last question there. And guys, the questions which are not answered, we will definitely answer them and send you part of the deck and the recording. So last question I have for the AudioCodes team, do you have a pre-sales engagement process where you help scope the right products and services? Is there any tool or something available?
I was hoping that would be the one you would pick, Zahid. The answer is absolutely yes. And that's, you know, the team that's on this call today is part of the pre-sales engagement process. And for this audience today, where your partners and distributors and kind of agents, Wasim would be one of those resources. But of course, Avi and I are always happy to have those conversations. And Avi, I think you were about to speak. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you said exactly as I'd said. Our details, our personal details, are in one of the slides. But of course, you can always reach out to us via the website. Those queries get routed directly to us anyway.
Super, thank you guys. So call to the action, I would say that finally, review your existing and new customer opportunity on BusinessWise. So now you can see if even they have existing PBX, they can still leverage that. If they have existing contract with their telcos, they can still leverage the direct routing AudioCodes session border controller there. If they have any faxing needs, any paging there, so they can leverage that. So it's like provide a full solution from the Microsoft Teams. They can get rid of PBX, and also they have auto attendant, call queuing, call parch, all of those features which were there. And if you just want to go back to the slide, Avi, and the next, I would say it will help you to build a BusinessWise offer with direct routing, right? So now, based on this session, it's a good idea to review if you already have made, let's say, existing security practice, or maybe you have a Teams or collaboration, how you can build a BusinessWise offer as part of this. And finally, I would say it's a good idea to develop managed services, like especially with Scott was saying, talking about like live cloud, how you can make it fast, how you can do it there. So develop the managed services, because what we have found, even it's not like a sales session, but it's through research, we always found if you want to retain the customer and if you want to earn really revenue, then you should have managed services. You should manage the customer and you should try to provide them end-to-end services. So with that, I will hand over to Laura back.
Great. Thanks, Zahid. I appreciate that. I have posted a short survey in the Q&A panel. We value your feedback and welcome your input on how we did today and what you would like to see in future sessions. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible, and we thank you for your participation in that. A reminder that the recording and a copy of the presentation deck from today's session will be available within 5 to 7 business days. Please look for an email from Worldwide Learning in the coming days with details on how to access those. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Zahid and Scott and Avi, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening. Goodbye.